name is Brian Young. Before I go any further, I just want to take a moment to recognize and honor the original inhabitants of this area, the Susquehannock. I don't know how to pronounce that, but this is just a Navajo pronunciation of it, and as well as the Iroquois Confederacy, who have been relocated to the Oklahoma state. So this is their homeland, and I just want to take a moment to say, Ahihet Susquehannock, Ado Iroquois Confederacy, Di Konegi E Nikea, Ado Di E Nevan, Ahihet. Thank you, Susquehannock and the Iroquois Nation. This is your land. I respect and honor you. Okay, so a little bit about me. Yat she Brian Young inishe, touching initially go tetnazat bashichin, torachitnia dashiche, alcohol toratote dashinella. Hello, my name is Brian Young. I am Red running into the Water clan. I am born for the Tangle People clan. My maternal grandfather's clan is Bitterwater, and my paternal grandfather's clan is Saltwater. I was born and raised on the Navajo reservation. I grew up traditionally, and whenever I hear or introduce myself and say that I grew up in a reservation, I imagine people thinking that I grew up in a town full of teepees and horses. But I want to show you a picture of one area in Fort Defiance, which is the town I went to school in, and just to kind of give you a visual of what Fort Defiance looks like when there's a beautiful rainbow. As Torah had mentioned, I have been working for Torah for about 2 years, coming in this January for the Amish Entrepreneur Show with Torah Bontrager. I've been a guest on her show in the first season for about 3 episodes. I talked a little bit about transgenerational trauma, and touched a little bit about sexual violence in Indigenous communities. And with regards to sexual violence and assault, I'm going to be talking about the boarding school experiences, the traumas endured, and moving on to talking about a more modern issue called missing and murdered Indigenous women. So just a brief overview, so that way we all are kind of on the same page. Here are some dates with regards to the advent of the boarding school system. In the early 1800s, the United States government was moving westward under the doctrine and methodology of manifest destiny, which is the dogma that the westward expansion of the United States government and Christian beliefs was inevitable and justified by any means necessary. Often those means were violent and bloody, and Native American communities were the victims of those assaults. In 1828, Andrew Jackson ran for president of the United States, basing his platform on solving and erasing the Indian problem, much like what we see today with Trump and his efforts to raise a wall. Andrew Jackson obviously won and was elected 2 years later after his election would pass the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which would lay the framework down for what would be known as the Trail of Tears, which lasted from 1831 all the way to 1850. In that framework, the United States government would assimilate indigenous nations of North America through reservations and the advent of boarding school systems. The Carlisle Industrial School was one of many boarding schools erected in the mid to late 1800s. Many of these boarding schools were constructed off and very far away from reservations. For instance, Carlisle Industrial School was erected 60 miles away from here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And a lot of its inhabitants were from the recently relocated Oklahoma nations, the nations that now reside in Oklahoma. The boarding schools operated under the Uniform Code of Study, which emphasized Eurocentric values, and by instilling these values into the younger generation of Indigenous individuals, the United States government was hoping to eradicate all Indigenous beliefs, customs, and languages. And tactics of the Uniform Codes of Study included chopping off hair of both male and female students, using any physical violence to ensure students adhered to strict rules and prohibited the use of Indigenous language. The Merriam Report of 1928 did a report suggesting that for the emotional sake of its students, boarding schools of the nature of Carlisle should do away with assimilation efforts. But there are still stories of abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual assault occurring in boarding schools across the United States, all the way up until as recent as the late 1970s, with the advent of Indigenous self-determination and the American Indian movement of the late 1960s and 70s. I tried my best to find hard data regarding statistics and information of sexual assault during the boarding school times, but unfortunately there is very little, if not none at all. All of the data indicates whether or not the Uniform Code of Study was successful or not. And this is kind of hardcore with being an Indigenous in a colonized society, is that all the information is coming from the outside and not from the inside. History courses talk about the Trail of Tears as a means that was necessary for the rise of the United States government, but rarely does it ever consider our contributions and our viewpoints. But what I was able to find, and this is a transition point, is statistics of the violence against Indigenous women today. And Native American women experience sexual assault at a rate 3 times higher than any other ethnicity in the nation. Roughly 1/3 of Native American women will be raped in her lifetime. And of those rapes, 70% are not reported, and of those rapes, up to 90% of them are committed by non-Indigenous individuals. And when compared to the national average, and if you look at the third bulletin point, Native American women and Alaska women are stalked at least twice as any other weight. 70% of American Indian and Alaskan Native women are stalked in their lifetime compared to 8.2% of white women, 6.7% African American women, and so on and so on. So there's a very skewed, very dangerous statistics about the safety of Native American women. And I believe that is because of the sexualization of Native American women in popular mainstream, and how mainstream likes to prefer the noble savage story with regards to Western stories, Last of the Mohicans, Dances with Wolves, Disney's Pocahontas. So there is a very, very prominent view of Native Americans and Native American women as being sexually promiscuous, sexually available. And this is a very dangerous consequence of stereotyping and the over-sexualization of Native American women. Not just in films, but also in the larger popular context of the United States. Especially in hipster culture. I hate hipsters. It's trendy and fashionable to dress up like an Indian, and often means dressing up in elaborate feathered costumes and bikinis, as you can see in David Guetta and Friends. And to the right of that, you can see a recent, well, about 2 years recent, Victoria's Secret fashion show. With regards to film, I've included the picture of Disney's Pocahontas, as well as Coriancha Kilcher in her depiction of Pocahontas in New World. Most recently, our communities lost one of our actresses by the name of Misty Upshall. The exact number of Indigenous women and girls who have gone missing or murdered in Canada since the 1970s is uncertain, and it's also the same in the United States. Estimates range broadly from roughly 1,000 to 4,000 women who have gone missing, and the reports, the investigations aren't following through with that. And I was able to find a trailer about this to kind of give you a reference of what that experience is like from Father. And I hope I can bring the volume up on that.
Misty was an award-winning Hollywood movie actress. She was also a member of the PETA organization. She was an advocate for the National Domestic Workers Alliance and the foundation Caring Across Generations. She was an avid supporter of the LGBT community. She was the founder of Indigo Children, a theater group, and as a tribal member, she was a proponent of tribal government reform. But her best roles were that of a family member and a friend.
She was very a concerned person for the welfare of the Native people. And maybe that could have been part of the tragedy of her end, is because she spoke up.
A lot of people knew Misty, the actress, the movie star, but they didn't know the real Misty the way we did.
Yes, cops, they wouldn't get involved in the investigation on how she found her death. It only resembles the position they had before when they wouldn't look for her. Now, afterwards, they did not do a thorough investigation.
Some of the media got it right, but there were so many stories published that instead of providing answers, the news reports only managed to raise speculation and left people to draw their own conclusions. The police never helped with the search and rescue. There was no formal investigation launched when witnesses came forward to say that my daughter had been murdered. Every aspect of her case was mishandled. I'm not even sure if the ashes they gave us belonged to my daughter.
Native American women have the highest rates of physical assault, sexual assault, and kidnapping of any ethnicity. If you are a Native American woman in the United States, there's a 33% chance that you will be raped. Often in families, mine included, female are given a talk of what to do when, not if, you were raped. Statistically, there are perpetrators non-natives, and there are many consequences these are one of many consequences that result from stereotypes of the sexualization of Native American women. So one of the reasons why I do work in film and writing is as a means to reclaim our stories, as a means to reclaim our identity. And I believe that stories themselves are an act of medicine, are an act of healing, and that through these stories we are able to base our behaviors and our attitudes towards very, very tough situations and problems. And these are a selection of movies that I find very, very helpful. One way to combat these increased rates and others is self-representation. Self-representation has to stem from individuals in each and every Native community. Native Americans can't expect the Hollywood industry to change their habits. We ourselves must become involved in the industry and produce not only Native stories, but at large that contribute to United States culture. The movie on the left is my dream movie. It's called Our The Fast Runner, and it was produced and directed in 2002, directed by Zacharias Kunuk. And it retells an Inuit legend, and it dramatizes the actual living conditions of their Inuit ancestors, and the only language spoken in the entire movie is Iqaluit. I want to point this out because of the impact that it's had on its community before and after. Zacharias Kunuk actually applied for a Guggenheim Foundation. In his application, he stated that suicide rates in his community were about 20%. So children in his community were committing, 1 in 5 were committing suicide. And he, in his Guggenheim application, attributed that increased statistic to the loss of culture, the loss of language. And he wanted to produce a movie that told one of their stories in their own language to help combat that. And a recent analysis of suicide rates had shown that suicide rates decreased to something much, much, much smaller. I think it was 7%. But just the power of self-representation and storytelling coming from individuals within that community cannot be overlooked. Rhymes for Young Ghouls, 2013, directed by Jeff Barnaby. He's one of my favorite Native directors. Talks and discusses sexual assault and physical violence within the boarding school community in Canada. And Drumtown Finest is one of the more recent films that I was also involved with. And so I definitely think that storytelling and self-representation is a viable option to help reduce these increased statistics of suicide and depression within communities who are often overlooked and who don't get the opportunity to tell their own stories. Thank you.